The email arrived at 9:03 a.m. on a Monday. Subject line: Organizational Restructuring, Confidential. I knew what it meant before I opened it. The signs had been accumulating for weeks. New VP hired above me without explanation. My direct reports being reassigned to other managers. Invitations to executive meetings suddenly no longer needed. Budget approvals that used to be route. I now requiring additional review. They were creating a box around me, making my role redundant without officially eliminating it. The corporate equivalent of slowly turning down someone's volume until they're muted entirely. The email confirmed it. Marcus, as part of our organizational restructuring, we're consolidating product management functions under the new VP of Product, Jennifer Walsh. Your current role as Director of Product Strategy will be transitioned to a Senior Product Manager position, reporting to Jennifer. This change is effective in 2 weeks. Please schedule time with HR to discuss the transition. Senior Product Manager. After 3 years as Director of Product Strategy, after building the product roadmap that had grown our customer base by 340%, after leading the development of features that now generated 60% of company revenue, a demotion dressed up as restructuring. I'm Marcus Reed. I'd been at Catalyst Analytics for 3 years, hired as Director of Product Strategy to lead product development for our data analytics platform. When I joined, Catalyst had 8,000 customers and $12 million in annual recurring revenue. Now, we had 35,000 customers and $52 million in ARR. I'd led the product strategy that drove that growth, identifying market opportunities, prioritizing features that customers actually wanted, shipping updates that solved real problems rather than adding complexity for complexity's sake. But 6 months ago, things had changed. We brought in a new CEO, Richard Morrison, from a larger tech company. Richard had his own ideas about product strategy and his own people he wanted in leadership roles. Jennifer Walsh was one of those people. She'd been Richard's VP of Product at his previous company. When Richard joined Catalyst, Jennifer followed 3 months later as VP of Product, a role that hadn't existed before and that created obvious redundancy with my director role. I tried to make it work. Collaborated with Jennifer. Shared my product roadmap and strategy documents. Offered to align our work to avoid duplication. But Jennifer wasn't interested in collaboration. She was interested in control. Every product decision I'd made for 3 years was suddenly under review. Every feature I'd prioritized was being questioned. Every strategic direction I'd established was being reevaluated to ensure alignment with Richard's vision. The message was clear. My work was being systematically discredited to justify replacing me with Jennifer's team. Now the official restructuring email had arrived. Senior Product Manager died, reporting to the person who'd spent 6 months undermining my work. A demotion that would quietly push me out while avoiding the optics of firing a director who'd driven significant company growth. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand something about this moment. This wasn't about whether I was being pushed out, that was happening regardless. This was about whether I'd accept the demotion quietly and fade away, or whether I'd make it clear that my contributions couldn't be erased just because new leadership wanted different people in place. If you've ever been restructured out of a role you'd performed successfully, if you've ever had your work undermined by new leadership who wanted to install their own team, if you've ever been told your achievements don't matter because management wants someone else, stay with me. Because what happened when I refused to accept the quiet push-out when investors who knew my name started asking questions changed everything about Richard's plan. My name is Marcus Reed, and I'd spent 15 years in product management before joining Catalyst Analytics. I understood how tech companies worked. Leadership changes, new executives bring their own teams, existing people get pushed out to make room. But I also understood that my product work at Catalyst wasn't easily replaceable. I'd built relationships with major customers. I'd developed deep knowledge of our market and user needs. I'd created the product roadmap that venture capital firms had cited when valuing the company. That last point was important. Catalyst had raised a $25 million Series B round 18 months ago. During that fundraising process, I'd presented a product strategy and roadmap to multiple VC firms. I'd answered their questions about market opportunity, competitive positioning, and our plans for capturing market share. The investors hadn't just given money to Catalyst Analytics. They'd invested in specific people executing a specific strategy. I was one of those people. My product roadmap was a core part of the investment thesis, which meant that quietly transitioning me to a diminished role wasn't just an internal HR matter. It was potentially relevant to investors who'd funded the company based partly on my work. I walked to the office of Andrew Chen, our CFO, and the executive I'd worked most closely with. Andrew had been at Catalyst since the founding and had been involved in both our Series A and Series B fundraising rounds. Andrew, do you have a few minutes? Sure, Marcus. Close the door. I assume this is about the restructuring email. You knew it was coming? I knew Richard wanted to consolidate product under Jennifer. I pushed back on making it a demotion for you, but Richard was insistent that he needed clear reporting lines. Clear reporting lines meaning pushing out anyone who isn't part of his inner circle. Andrew didn't disagree. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that transitioning me to a senior PM role after I've driven significant product growth and delivered the roadmap that got us Series B funding is not going to look good to investors who know my name and my work. Andrew was quiet for a moment. Are you planning to contact investors? I'm planning to make decisions that protect my professional reputation and career. If that includes talking to people who funded this company based partly on my product strategy, yes. Marcus, be careful. If you go to investors complaining about internal restructuring, that could be seen as insubordination or breach of confidentiality. I'm not planning to complain. I'm planning to inform them that the person who presented the product roadmap during Series B fundraising is being demoted and pushed out. That's material information about the company they've invested in. You really think investors will care? I think David Park at Velocity Ventures will care. He specifically cited my product roadmap presentation as one of the reasons Velocity led the Series B. I think he'll have questions about why the person who built that roadmap is suddenly being restructured out of a leadership role. Andrew looked uncomfortable but thoughtful. If you do this, there's no walking it back. Richard will see it as going over his head and around the company. You'll be forcing a confrontation. Richard's already forcing a confrontation. He's just trying to do it quietly so there's no pushback. I'm making it public so there is pushback. That afternoon, I called David Park at Velocity Ventures. David had been the lead partner on Catalyst Series B round and sat on our board as the investor representative. Marcus, good to hear from you. What's going on? David, I wanted to inform you of some organizational changes at Catalyst. Richard is restructuring product management. My role as director of product strategy is being eliminated, and I'm being transitioned to a senior product manager position. That's surprising. You've been driving product strategy there for 3 years, right? Correct. I built the product roadmap that we presented during Series B fundraising. The roadmap that you said was a key factor in Velocity's investment decision. I remember. You had clear market insights and a logical feature prioritization strategy. That was one of the stronger product presentations I've seen from a Series B company. That roadmap is still what we're executing against. But Richard brought in Jennifer from his previous company and is now consolidating product under her leadership. My role is being diminished. How does Jennifer's product background compare to yours in this market? She has strong product management experience in a different vertical financial services software. But she doesn't have analytics platform experience or relationships with our customer base. This feels less like optimizing product leadership and more like Richard installing people he's comfortable with, regardless of whether they're the best fit for this specific market. That's concerning. When is this transition happening? They want it effective in 2 weeks. And what are you planning to do? I'm evaluating my options. But I wanted you to know that the person who built the product strategy you invested in is being pushed out. That might affect your assessment of the company's direction and execution capability. David was quiet for a moment. Marcus, I appreciate you letting me know. Let me make some calls. I'd like to understand Richard's thinking on this restructuring before it becomes final. I appreciate that, David. 2 hours later, I got a call from Andrew Chen. Marcus, what did you say to David Park? I informed him that I was being restructured out of my role, and that the product roadmap he'd invested in was being put under new leadership with different experience and background. Done. Well, he just called Richard and asked for a board call to discuss the product leadership transition. Richard is furious. He thinks you went behind his back to undermine the restructuring. I didn't go behind his back. I talked to an investor who has millions of dollars invested in this company based partly on my product work. He has a right to know when key people are being pushed out. Richard sees it as insubordination. Richard can see it however he wants. But he can't quietly push out the director of product strategy who presented to investors without those investors asking questions. He made a mistake thinking this would be a quiet, internal matter. The board call happened the next day. I wasn't on the call. It was Richard, Andrew, David Park, and 2 other board members. But Andrew told me afterward what transpired. David had asked Richard to explain the rationale for restructuring product leadership. Richard had outlined his vision for consolidating product management, bringing in more experienced executives, and aligning product strategy with broader company goals. David had then asked specific questions. What was wrong with the current product strategy? What expertise did Jennifer bring that Marcus lacked? How would the transition affect execution of the roadmap that had been presented during fundraising? Richard's answers had been vague. Fresh perspective, proven leadership at larger companies, ensuring alignment with my vision. David had pressed harder. The product roadmap Marcus built had been a key factor in Velocity's investment decision. Customers were satisfied with product direction. Revenue attributed to features Marcus had prioritized was growing significantly. What specific problems was Richard solving by restructuring Marcus out of a leadership role? Richard had gotten defensive, talking about his prerogative as CEO to organize his team, suggesting that board members shouldn't micromanage personnel decisions. David had responded that normally he wouldn't question internal restructuring. Well, a company wants to diminish or remove someone who'd been instrumental in securing investment, that affects the investment thesis and warrants board discussion. The call had ended without resolution. But the message was clear. David wasn't comfortable with Richard quietly pushing me out, and he was going to scrutinize the decision. That evening I got an email from Richard requesting a meeting the next morning to discuss your transition and ensure we're aligned on path forward. The meeting was in Richard's office. Just the 2 of us. He didn't look happy. Marcus, I understand you spoke with David Park about the restructuring. I did. I informed him that I was being transitioned out of a leadership role and that the product strategy he'd invested in was being reorganized. That was inappropriate. Internal personnel decisions shouldn't be escalated to investors without going through proper company channels. David Park isn't just an investor. He's a board member who led our Series B based partly on my product presentations. He has a fiduciary duty to oversee the company's strategic direction. Changes to product leadership affect that direction. You went to him to create pressure against my restructuring decision. I went to him to inform him of material changes to the team executing the strategy he funded. Whether that creates pressure is your problem, not mine. Richard's expression hardened. Marcus, I'm trying to build an executive team that can scale with the company. That means bringing in people with experience at larger organizations. Jennifer has managed product teams of 40 people at companies doing $200 in revenue. You've been at a startup with 35 people and $52 in revenue. There's a difference in what's required as we grow. There's also a difference between people who know this specific market and people who have generic VP of product experience in different verticals. Jennifer might have managed bigger teams, but does she understand analytics platforms? Does she have relationships with our customers? Does she know why our users chose us over competitors? She'll learn while I'm demoted to senior PM reporting to her. While the strategy I built is dismantled and replaced with whatever Jennifer thinks works based on her financial services background. That's not scale. That's a replacement for the sake of installing your people. My people, as you call them, have proven track records. I have a proven track record at this company. 340% customer growth, $40 in revenue growth, and 60% of current revenue from features I prioritize. You're dismantling that because you want executives you're personally comfortable with, not because there's a performance problem. This decision is final, Marcus. You can accept the senior PM role and work with Jennifer, or you can choose to leave the company with a standard severance package. But the restructuring is happening. Then let's see how investors respond when they understand what you're doing and why. I left Richard's office and went back to my desk. An hour later, I received another call from David Park. Marcus, I've been thinking about our conversation and the board call yesterday. I'm concerned about Catalyst's product direction if you're being pushed out. I'd like to discuss something with you, confidentially. I'm listening. Velocity has a portfolio company, Datascope Analytics, that's in a complementary space to Catalyst. They need a VP of product to lead their next phase of growth. Would you be interested in a conversation? You're offering me a job at another portfolio company? I'm offering you an introduction to a CEO who needs someone with your exact background and skills. What happens from there is between you and them. But Marcus, if Richard is going to push you out, you should have options. And frankly, I'd rather see you building products at a company I'm invested in than watching Catalyst make a mistake by letting you go. That's interesting timing. It's strategic timing. If Richard is determined to restructure you out, there's not much I can do to stop him without creating a bigger board conflict than is warranted. But I can make sure you land somewhere that values what you bring. And I can make sure Richard understands that good people have options. 2 days later, I had a call with Thomas Chen, CEO of Datascope Analytics. Datascope was earlier stage than Catalyst, 12,000 customers, $18 MR, but grown quickly and well-funded by Velocity and other top-tier VCs. Thomas and I talked for 90 minutes about product strategy, market opportunity, and his vision for Datascope's growth. His questions were sophisticated and specific. He clearly understood the analytics platform space and knew what he was looking for in a VP of product. At the end of the call, Thomas said, "Marcus, David spoke highly of your work at Catalyst. From this conversation, I can see why. I'd like to continue discussions about you joining Datascope as VP of product. Are you interested? Very interesting. What's your timeline? I'd like to move quickly. We're at a stage where product leadership is critical, and we don't have time for a long search. If we're aligned on role, compensation, and strategy, I'd want you starting within a month. That works with my timeline at Catalyst. They're transitioning me out of my current role in 2 weeks." David mentioned that. For what it's worth, I think Richard is making a mistake. But his mistake is my opportunity. Let's talk again tomorrow about specifics. Over the next week, I negotiated an offer with Datascope, VP of Product, $185,000 salary, a $25,000 increase over my Catalyst director compensation, equity package with strong upside given Datascope's earlier stage, and direct reporting to the CEO with autonomy over product strategy. I accepted the offer and informed Richard that I'd be leaving Catalyst rather than accepting the senior PM demotion. My last day would be in 2 weeks. Richard's response was terse. "Understood. HR will coordinate your exit process." But the story didn't end there. Because within a week of my accepting the Datascope role, 2 other things happened. First, Sarah Kim, one of my senior product managers at Catalyst and one of the strongest PMS I'd worked with, called me. "Marcus, I heard you're leaving. What happened?" I explained the restructuring and my decision to join Datascope rather than accept a demotion. "That's insane," Sarah said. "You built this product strategy, right? Everyone knows the growth we've seen is because of your roadmap and prioritization. Pushing you out for Jennifer makes no sense, unless Richard just wants his own people regardless of performance. That's exactly what's happening. Well, I'm not interested in working under Jennifer. I've been in meetings with her. She doesn't understand this market and she's dismissive of the strategy you built. If you're going to Datascope, would there be room for a senior PM there? Let me talk to Thomas and get back to you." Thomas was enthusiastic about adding Sarah to the team. If she worked with you at Catalyst and understands the market, she'd be a great addition. Make her an offer. Second, 3 of our largest customers, representing about $4 in combined R, reached out to me within days of learning I was leaving. Each conversation was similar. "Marcus, we heard you're leaving Catalyst. We've worked with you on product roadmap for 2 years. You've understood our needs and delivered features that actually solve our problems. Who's taking over product direction?" "Jennifer Walsh, the new VP of product." "We don't know Jennifer. Will she continue the strategic direction you've been leading?" "That's unclear. Richard wants to reevaluate product strategy under Jennifer's leadership. That concerns us. We chose Catalyst partly because of the product roadmap you presented. If that direction is changing or if you're no longer driving product decisions, We need to reconsider whether Catalyst is still the right platform for us. I didn't encourage these customers to leave Catalyst. That would be inappropriate, potentially actionable. But I also didn't discourage them from evaluating their options or mentioning their concerns to Catalyst leadership. Within 2 weeks of my departure announcement, Andrew Chen called me. Marcus, we have a problem. 3 major customers have indicated they're evaluating alternatives to Catalyst because you're leaving, and they're concerned about product direction under Jennifer. I'm aware. They called me to express those concerns. What did you tell them? I told them I'm leaving, Jennifer is taking over product strategy, and they should direct their questions about future direction to her or Richard. I didn't tell them to leave or suggest they wouldn't be well served. But I also didn't tell them everything would be fine because I don't know if that's true. Richard is furious. He thinks you're poisoning customer relationships on your way out. I'm not poisoning anything. Customers are asking legitimate questions about product leadership transitions. If Richard thought this restructuring wouldn't affect customer confidence, he was naive. He's talking about whether your departure violates non-compete or non-solicitation agreements. I haven't solicited anyone. Sarah. Kim reached out to me and asked about opportunities. I didn't recruit her. Customers called me to express concerns. I didn't encourage them to leave. Richard is looking for someone to blame because his quiet restructuring turned into a visible problem. 3 weeks after I joined Datascope, I received an email from David Park. Marcus, thought you'd want to know? Richard has reversed the product restructuring at Catalyst. Jennifer is staying as VP of Product, but they're hiring a new Director of Product Strategy to maintain the roadmap you built. They're also promoting one of your former PMs to Senior Director to retain institutional knowledge. Apparently, the customer concerns and board questions made it clear that dismantling your product organization was creating more problems than Richard anticipated. Too little, too late. I was already at Datascope, building product strategy for a company that valued what I brought from day one. Sarah had joined as Senior Product Manager and was contributing immediately. And at least 2 of the 3 concerned Catalyst customers had reached out to ask about Datascope's platform as they evaluated alternatives. 6 months after leaving Catalyst, Datascope's R had grown from $18 to $31. We'd shipped 3 major features that customers loved, signed several enterprise contracts, and were executing on a product roadmap that Thomas and the board were confident in. I also heard through the grapevine that Catalyst's growth had slowed significantly. Customer churn was up. Product releases were delayed. Jennifer was struggling to navigate the analytics platform market without the institutional knowledge that my team had built. Richard had gotten what he wanted, his own people in leadership roles. But he'd lost the execution capability that had driven Catalyst's growth, and the investors who'd funded that growth weren't happy about it. A year after leaving Catalyst, I was speaking at a product management conference. My session was titled, When Politics Replaces Performance, Surviving Leadership Changes in Tech. A year ago, I told the audience, I was Director of Product Strategy at a fast-growing analytics company. I'd built the product roadmap that grew our customer base by 340% and our revenue by over $40. Then a new CEO arrived, with his own vision and his own team. Within 6 months, I was being restructured out of my role and demoted to Senior PM. The plan was to push me out quietly, make my role redundant, diminish my authority, create conditions where leaving seemed like my only option. And if I left quietly, my departure would be just another anonymous restructuring that no one outside the company noticed or questioned. But there was a problem with that plan. Investors knew my name. I'd presented product strategy during fundraising. I'd answered their questions about market opportunity and competitive positioning. I'd built credibility with the people who'd funded the company. When I was being pushed out, I made a decision. Instead of leaving quietly and letting new leadership erase my contributions, I contacted the lead investor and informed him that the person who'd built the product roadmap he'd funded was being demoted and replaced. That single conversation changed everything. The investor asked hard questions. The board scrutinized the restructuring. Customers expressed concerns about product direction. And suddenly, the quiet pushout became a visible problem that leadership had to address. I still left the company. The damage to my role was done and I'd found a better opportunity. But I left on my terms, with my reputation intact, with key team members following me, and with the company, understanding that pushing out people who drive results has consequences. Here's what I learned. If you've built something valuable, if you've developed relationships with customers or investors or board members, your departure can't be as quiet as management might hope. Use that reality. Don't let new leadership erase your contributions and push you out like you never mattered. Document what you've built. Maintain relationships with people who understand your value. And when you're being pushed out, make sure the people who funded the company or depend on its success know what's happening and why. After the presentation, a woman in her 30s approached me. Mr. Reed, I'm in a similar situation. A new executive was hired above me. My role is being diminished, and I think they're creating conditions to push me out. But I'm not. Sure, I have the leverage you did. I haven't presented to investors or worked directly with board members. Do you have relationships with major customers? Yes, several. Do those customers know your name and your work? Some do. I've been their main point of contact for implementations and ongoing support. Then you have leverage. If you're pushed out, those customers will notice. They'll ask questions about who's taking over their accounts. If the answer is someone new who doesn't have the relationship or knowledge you built, that creates concern. Companies care about customer retention. If your departure threatens that, you have more leverage than you think. But I don't want to threaten the company. I just want to be treated fairly. You're not threatening anyone. You're recognizing the value you've created and using that value to negotiate fair treatment. There's a difference between saying, promote me or customers will leave versus, I've built important relationships. If you push me out without fair transition, those relationships will be disrupted in ways that affect customer retention. The first is extortion. The second is just stating reality. 18 months after leaving Catalyst, Datascope raised a $45 Series C round, led by Velocity Ventures. The valuation had more than tripled since I joined, driven partly by the product strategy I'd implemented and the customer relationships we'd built. During the Series C process, David Park mentioned to me, Marcus, when I introduced you to Thomas. I knew you'd do well. But you've exceeded even my expectations. The product roadmap you've built here is one of the strongest I've seen at this stage. This is what Catalyst lost when Richard decided politics mattered more than performance. Do you still have concerns about Catalyst? They've stabilized somewhat. But their growth trajectory changed significantly after you left. They're still a decent company, but they're not the standout performer they were when you were driving the product. That matters to investors. Not just financially, but reputationally. Companies that push out high performers for political reasons develop reputations as difficult places to work. That makes it harder to attract talent. Has Richard acknowledged that the restructuring was a mistake? Not directly. But the fact that they've had to hire multiple people to replace the capabilities you and Sarah brought suggests they understand they lost something valuable. Whether Richard personally admits that is less important than whether the company learns from it. 2 years after leaving Catalyst, I was promoted to Chief Product Officer at Datascope. The company had grown to 48,000 customers and $67 in ARR time. I now oversaw product, design, and customer success, all the functions that touched product development and delivery. In my first all-hands meeting as CPO, I made a point of saying something I wished I'd heard earlier in my career. Your contributions matter, even when leadership changes try to minimize them. Document what you build. Maintain relationships with customers, investors, and stakeholders who understand your value. Don't let politics erase performance. And when you're being pushed out, make sure the people who matter know what's actually happening and why. 3 years after the attempted quiet push-out, I ran into Richard Morrison at an industry conference. He approached me during the networking reception, looking slightly uncomfortable. Marcus, I wanted to say hello. Congratulations on your success at Datascope. I've been following the company's growth. Thank you, Richard. How are things at Catalyst? We're doing well. Still growing, still competitive in the market. I'm glad to hear it. Marcus, I've thought about the restructuring situation. In hindsight, I should have handled it differently. You'd built a strong product, strategy, and dismantling that created more disruption than I anticipated. Yes, it did. I was focused on bringing in people I'd worked with before, And I didn't fully appreciate the institutional knowledge and customer relationships you developed. That was a mistake. I appreciate you acknowledging that. But Richard, the mistake wasn't just about institutional knowledge. It was about thinking you could quietly push out someone who'd driven significant company value without anyone noticing or questioning it. That's not how it works when investors and customers know who's responsible for results. I understand that now. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for how that situation played out. I'm not. Because it led me to Datascope, where I've built something even more valuable with leadership that actually appreciates what I bring. So thank you, actually, for pushing me out. It forced me to find a better opportunity. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I want you to understand something. This isn't about revenge or proving someone wrong. It's about understanding that when you've built something valuable and developed real relationships with stakeholders, your departure can't be as invisible as new leadership might hope. When Richard tried to push me out quietly, he assumed it would be an internal personnel matter that no one outside the company would notice or care about. But investors who'd funded the company based partly on my product presentations did care. Customers who'd built relationships with me did care. Board members who'd heard my strategic thinking did care. That created leverage. Not to force Catalyst to keep me, that ship had sailed once Richard decided he wanted his own team. But to ensure my departure happened on terms that protected my reputation, enabled me to find better opportunities, and made clear that pushing out high performers has consequences. If you're being pushed out, remember, document what you've built, maintain relationships with people who understand your value, and don't let new leadership erase your contributions quietly. You have more leverage than you think. If this resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe. Share your experiences in the comments about being restructured out or having new leadership try to minimize your contributions. Those stories help others recognize their own value. Remember, they tried to push me out quietly, thinking no one would notice or care. Unfortunately for them, investors knew my name, customers knew my work, and board members knew my contributions. The quiet plan failed, and I found something better.